Yeah, so today's topic is decolonized performance. The question we'll be exploring before we start reading pages: what does it mean to decolonize our performances?
Awesome question. Awesome question.
Yeah. So we could go from that question. I have more in my thought, but I don't want to confuse anyone. So we can just jump off from that.
So what does it mean to decolonize our performances? I've been hearing this question primarily in British theater circles, decolonizing theater, and British diaspora artists talking about it. So I really was excited when you brought that up as a possible conversation point, Jasmeene. And for me, decolonization is about bending the form, you know. I don't know if it's necessary to break it, but you can bend it, because in the end I personally feel you have to understand the audience's capacity for comprehending story, and you have to be able to tell the story in a way that they can get, but at the same time bending it in a way that stretches their imagination, because that's really important. And I really feel that with the advent of this whole GPT chat, the chat bots and all that, that's the only way we can truly claim space, is constantly challenging form, because the bots are following a formula. And we, by altering the formula, we're constantly going to be keeping things vital and alive and organic. So figuring out what is organic for our community, that's my question. How do we figure that out? And for me as a writer, I just figure what's organic for me, and I just hope that somebody else can follow through. If I get it, I'm sure you'll get it. And if you don't, you'll tell me. That's what I feel when I think of the concept of decolonizing our performances.
Yeah, I mean, oh.
No, AnJu was
on me.
But
no, I was just snapping to what you just said, because when you asked the question, I was going to say whatever's organic to you, you know. So I don't remember if it was here or someone else I was talking to, and I was like, I don't know if, you know, what I write, whether it'll be like interesting or like people will gravitate toward it. And the person, I can't remember who it was just like, write what moves you and what gravitates to you. And then it also makes me think about some of the, you know, authors like Toni Morrison and some of the other greats. And it's like, you know, they wrote the story that they wanted to see. So yeah, that's what that makes me think about.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, because I was rereading the questions or like the comments you also sent via email, Jasmeene, and like, I agree with bending the form, Magaly. I also feel like there is something to be said about breaking expectations of how a story is supposed to go, because colonization is inherently saturated in victory, quote unquote. The victors write the history. And so like this idea of the hero's journey and like the very Western way of storytelling, that like the individual goes and out there and they win, understanding what it looks like when community wins, and also looking at what it looks like when I heard about the carrier method of storytelling, which is about gathering as opposed to conquest. Like, yeah, the man goes out, you know, goes out from the tribe and kills the woolly mammoth, but what does it look like for the hunter-gatherer? Like, it's for the gatherers, not the hunters, like the gatherers of the tribe. What does it look like? What does that story look like, rather than going out there and claiming victory? What does it look like to gather? And so I think that's a way of decolonizing the performance, and like subverting the expectation of what it means to tell a story, that everybody's expecting there to be one hero or there to be a winner, there to be an antagonist, but what does it look like when it's actually communal and tribal? And also, the funny thing that I heard about ChatGPT was that because a large majority of the resources available for mining this information from these AIs is largely white-centered, European-centered work, the people of the global majority who have stories to tell, they ain't robbing our work because our stuff ain't out there. So, which is both a blessing and a curse, I guess, in a way. But the other last thing I wanted to say too is that there's also a competition of the colonizer. So, like, I was having this conversation about the term Latinx and how it's an Anglicization of a Spanish word. So it's like, which colonization are we, which colonizer gets to win? The English language over the Spanish colonizer language over what it means to be like people of different origins. So like, on top of the fact that we're trying to decolonize our performance, we also have an inherent competition of the colonizer. Because when you look at Asian cultures, like they consider like China and Japan a lot of times as the major colonizer. And then here in the Western Hemisphere, we're looking at France and we're looking at Great Britain and we're looking at Spain. And so it's like the competition of which language wins out. And so language, especially if we're utilizing language that isn't of the colonizer, that's why I love to throw in like Arawak terms every now and then, just to like throw some people off. But all right, I'm gonna shut up now.
No, don't shut up. Don't shut up. Keep talking.
Tanya.
I know there's so much that I want to echo on that. I think the thing that I also think about is like form, right? Like the form, there's a standardization or quote unquote standardization. I think that it is the epitome of what colonization of theater is that there's a good play and that play gets put through this, it gets picked up or it gets supported and then it goes from A to Z and then it goes from, from incubation to Broadway, just in a lack of like, in a perspective, like, and then when we see plays that break those forms, break those ideologies, center stories that are not necessarily the traditional beginning, middle, and end, or traditional, we're going to go ahead and see somebody triumph. And even in things where suddenly like the language gets altered, there's, magical realism, we can throw terms all day long. And I think that that's where I find where it's all about being good enough. Like theater, is this good enough? And is there space? I question the actual, like, is there enough room for us to explore the journey in the storytelling? From the artist and the incubation to who they're telling it to where it's getting presented, to even when you think about like, okay, well, who the audience and how does the audience participate? Is the audience just the voyeur? Is the audience engaged? Is the audience even giving back into the storytelling itself? Because I feel like being an artist in this day and age, it's all about the end product and not the process, and creating space for, I think, when you start to deconstruct how we look at the process and how the process actually is part of the product, not the end product, then I think that's where people can go ahead and be on a longer journey with pieces of work, pieces of storytelling. Yeah, that's that's my thought for right now.
Yeah, I was thank you, because that's something I've been thinking about, is like the space, like the rehearsal space, and like how it starts there and how like hierarchical things are, and like what if we break, I mean, I've been in spaces where you break the hierarchy, but the question becomes like, okay, how do we now create the work now that we've kind of broken the idea of like a director and the playwright? But I think another thing that I've learned is that part of that like colonization is that it's so like the player is so individual, and like the even though we say it's an ensemble, and this like idea of the genius, and it actually comes from like the Romantic age, like, and like it's supposed to be this very like melancholy person who writes this thing, and then like, oh wow, beautiful, you're a genius, and like we just like feed on this idea of a genius, and I feel like it doesn't make space for failure. And like for me, I imagine like a decolonized performance or decolonized spaces make space for like failure and mistakes, and instead of like having to, like what you said, Tanya, to think of the product, to like have something that, you know, will make money or like bring a mass amount of audiences to seats. Yeah, like personally, I think sometimes I just feel so afraid to fail, because like I have to be a genius. I have to be, I have to show an excellent product. And it makes, as you said, it makes no room for process.
And I think that also comes in what you have to kind of train the audience. Like, you know, there are companies that have had open rehearsals and maybe like 2 people come. You know, something that I thought was really evocative was when Susan Laurie Parks was doing her Write With Me at the Public, where she would just sit and like, I mean, for weeks at a time, you know, just sit and write. And I was like, that's bending the shape of what process looks like and demystifying what the artist looks like. And I think that is super important. And I don't know necessarily if that's even emphasized enough, is how do we bring audiences and almost train them to not just show up for, you know, the 4th weekend of a show, closing weekend usually.
And I think at the same time, we need to figure out what the definition of audience in theater needs to be moving forward, as opposed to what it was in the past, because we're not going back to the past, right? I mean, things have been changing rapid speed, but since the pandemic, things have changed like quadruple rapid speed. And so what is audience? And I like the question that was asked about, does a playwright have to be a genius? Why does a playwright have to be a genius to be regarded as a playwright? I mean, honestly, I don't know how humanity can function without hierarchy, because I've tried that model where there is no hierarchy, and the moment you get more than 2 people together, more than 1 person together, someone wants to be on top. I mean, I have never been in a setting working on anything where someone doesn't want to be like the head honcho, when everybody said, let's just be democratic about it. Someone slips in there. And so I don't know, maybe there is somewhere in the world where that is possible, where a group of people won't be looking for a hero to look up to, someone to be the genius and the one on top guiding.
I mean, there's a difference between hierarchy and colonization, though. There's hierarchy in every tribal and or like indigenous and or original way of doing life, I think, in the world. But colonization is specifically overtaking the other to reign, to become supreme. Like, I will completely squash your identity to infuse it and assimilate it with mine. And what happens in theater is, because we have a very Western way of doing things, everything has to look like Broadway. Like, honestly, I think the colonization in the United States is that every regional and not every, but a lot of regional and or community theaters want to model New York. And I think that inherently is colonization. I think decolonization is actually what we're doing now. We're creating works in community, and we're showcasing them in the way that we can. And we're talking about how do we advertise to our community and let them know about what we're doing. That is inherently decolonized, because we're not trying to model it based on what Broadway is doing. That's my take on what theater looks like, because I think it's hierarchical. Magaly, we look to you. You are our leader, you know, and we look to you. And I don't think there's any problem with that. I don't think that's colonization, because every tribe in the history of everything has always had someone to look up to. You need somebody who you can look up to. Sometimes we're followers, sometimes we're leaders. I've been in both settings. But colonization is saying, no, 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 this is the absolute supreme model that has to be done. And I think that, and you must assimilate and be like me to be right. And that's the damage that's been done with colonization, is that we've completely erased all culture because we wanted it to look like Europe. I'm just gonna say it, like Europe, or like a major country that has taken over another country. But decolonizing performance is saying, I don't have to do everything like Broadway. I don't have to do everything that way.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all this. I think, I mean, I'll just say recently having had an experience where I put down, just because honestly, I was like, this is good language for the grant. We're deconstructing hierarchies. And then when we got into it, I was like, the fuck does this mean? You know what I mean? It was like very scary. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that actually. Can you tell us what to do? And I'm the playwright, like, but once we were all like very like worried about it because it was very like new ground. And it's like we had a director, we scenic designer, media, but like as we started figuring it out, it seemed to be what like, and we talked about it actively of like, this is new, this is strange. I mean, what started arising was like, it just meant the bot, like the hierarchy was this became the story, which was like a giant relief as a playwright too. I was like, please take this off of my hands. And having everyone there from the beginning, which I think was just a different structure than, again, American theater. You know, I think it all comes down to the money, that this would be, that it's just like, how do we, I think once we figure out these, making the resources available to all in whatever ways those are in an equitable sense, because that just changes. If you can have the designer from the top, then everyone sort of say, I don't know, it was interesting. We were like, the hat would switch, the energy would switch, and it was like flow. It felt very feminine in that way, like a different, you know, to me when I'm working like not meaning like male or female, just like that energy of like very masculine based is like and sometimes I'm like, we need this moment. We need our Capricorns need to come together. But it was almost like, you know, just energy and I'm interested in like how to create those structures from the beginning of how you set up a room, that it can be quite radical for people just to enter the space and, you know, and uncomfortable to enter the space and be like, we're going to check in, we're going to do different, you know, we're going to do this differently than you would expect a space where you're getting a paycheck and your paycheck defines your role and your responsibility. Meaning the more you get paid, probably the less you have on your plate.
Yeah, you know, like I'm hearing this, and it's like I bring up the question of like, what is the intention versus the product? Because I feel like when hierarchies bubble up, especially because we're so used to having a very, I mean, I've been in spaces where it's the devising work is very different. And that does bring a lot of challenges of who's the leader, who's not the leader. Do we need a leader? How do we still be able to create work together and collaboratively? And what does that really mean? And I think about it's like the intention of the individual artists who come together in collaboration with the ensembles. But then when you have something like, you know, you have a piece of work that people are going to come see, like, when is the stopping point? And it's very easy to almost fall back into a traditional, well, this is the director and the director's supposed to know all. This is these are the scenic designers and they're going to create these things. This is the costume person. And then everyone falls into their roles. But what is fascinating is how do we keep questioning that from that process? Where do we let go as the individual, or where do we jump in to create that work, the thing that people come see?
I think that the stories that we feel allowed to tell are colonized. I mean, how many times do we go and we look on a theater's website that we're thinking about sending something to or contacting and say, okay, well, what do they do? And then we cater ourselves to fit into the box of what's acceptable or producible or attractive to an industry, which is why a lot of the time, unfortunately, you kind of fall into Black play, brown play, and the brown play takes place in the kitchen, and the mother or the grandmother is the main character, and there's food, and that's the brown play. And then the Black play is similar but different in certain ways, and you know, it's just kind of like, and sure, it's kind of works within a system. And I think that we often forget that at the end of the day, theater is a business. Yes, it's an art form, but it's also a business. The business side of it keeps it alive. And so it's okay, well, what can we do that we know can succeed, and what can we do that we know isn't going to rattle any feathers or anything or make people too upset? Okay, let's follow this kind of system. But that only seems to be the case with us. There's no white play section. That can be broad, that can be anything, but we're kind of like either in the kitchen or the apartment living room or something. So yeah.
Oh my God, I'm never writing a kitchen again. Writing any scenes in a kitchen again. That's it.
Well, there goes Jumu.
But here's my question for you. Here's my question. You said there are these little columns where we fit in order to get produced, but then it comes back to the conversation of where's the money? Who's putting the money? And how do we decolonize the audience? Because once you decolonize the audience, then you're decolonizing the investor who will put money into the decolonized storytelling. I mean, Steppenwolf Theater started off as like a handful of actors coming together and saying, we're gonna do our thing, right? And now it's like world famous, they've got massive building, they got millions of dollars thrown in their pocket. So it sounds like decolonizing means artists taking control. Artists putting their money where their mouth is and doing the stuff, and then building the audience, and then creating a whole new flavor.
But if you look at something like the Labyrinth Theater Company, who also has a long history, but they don't have a space anymore. They are, they're struggling with getting, they ended up having just a few things go to Broadway, yay. But then they're struggling to also have a place to keep playing. And they too had the same intent. We want to get our actors all together, create some work, and they have. So it in some ways, it's like, it's looking at those two models, and then you have to look at who's doing it and how are they doing it, and who's being able to, because it is about, like, at the end of the day, it's about who is going to be, supporting them and giving, supporting us, really, like, we're all in this room, who's supporting us. How do we can create masterpieces and still, like, 2 years later, not have our stuff produced? Whereas if you have like Neil LaBute or somebody else, they can like fart out a script and fart out something, and then all of a sudden, like, they get fast tracked.
Yes.
I see the two hands, so I'm going to just say this really quickly. I don't think the audience needs to be decolonized. I think the audience needs to be aware. I think that, you're giving too much credit to the theaters who don't put awareness into the communities that would be able to reflect and see themselves in the stories. I had a fellowship And it was these like Broadway marketing people, and they blatantly said, we advertise to white upper middle class families, and if we advertise to families of color, it's a mixed race family. They blatantly said that. That's who they advertise to. That's who fills those seats so that they can keep the tickets at a certain rate. And I doubt that regional theaters are any different. So I think it's a matter of awareness. I wasn't aware of the shows that were playing regionally when I was growing up. I didn't care because it wasn't something that was put in my hand. I knew when the big Broadway shows came. I knew when The Lion King was in town. I didn't know what was playing down the street because no one gave me that access. So I don't think it's a matter of decolonizing the audience. I think it's a matter of letting the audience know they can be an audience.
Rivka.
There's one vision I have. I don't know how it fully works yet, but it's like there's a like having more because really like it's the means of production, right? It's the theater. It's like you like a real public theater, but that meaning like the means of productions are passed around. Like if there's a few, just like 2 theaters and you know you're going to get it for 1 month a year, like a co-op version of a theater, and then your company is going to do the work. I'll help promote your play because I know that when it comes time for mine, like we're all kind of switching hats. The hierarchies are there, but they change at a different period of time. It's not fully fleshed out, but it's something like that.
But I really love the ideas that we've been like circulating, that to decolonize is to not assimilate, to own your message. To decolonize is to allow the audience to learn that that they're people who have messages that resonate with them. So come be seen, come feel that your viewpoints matter on the world stage. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that. To decolonize is to take a look at hierarchies and redefine them.
Well, and I'd like to, Rivka, you were going to say something real quick.
I was going to add something, but go ahead. I can go.
Well, I was just going to say that I do think that that. So I recently just saw at the O'Neill somebody Love Iowa Through Further, which was basically a response to Julius Caesar, but like in antebellum South. So like you had 7 Black women rising up against a white woman in a mistress plantation situation. And let me tell you, it gave me Ntozake Shange vibes with like For Colored Girls, and it was very Shakespearean. But it made me think, it was like, is this actual decolonization? Like, or is this taking a story that the colonized world knows and reshaping it into another voice? And so I wonder if that's another form of assimilation. So like we can abolish capitalism, we can abolish hierarchies, we can do all that. But if the stories that we're telling are still palatable and are still assimilated or similar to the stories that we've already been telling, I don't know how that, again, this is a question within me of watching that production, because I was like, this is beautiful, it was gorgeous, it was amazing, but at the heart of it, it was still Shakespeare. It was still Julius Caesar. So is that a form of decolonization? Taking the convention and reformatting it? Or is that a form of assimilation of taking the format and, I don't know.
Can you just, so you're saying that they just took Julius Caesar and then adapted it? Or is this
not
a
exactly
play that was written in the form of?
They took inspiration from Julius Caesar, and was like, they made it like a response. Like they took this kind of the story, like I've been thinking about doing this with Tartuffe, actually. I've been thinking about taking Tartuffe and using like Joel Osteen as like my caricature and like doing my own response to Tartuffe and like the evangelical like everybody like the story of Tartuffe. Everybody knows Molière. Anyway, but again, that's like an idea of like everyone knows this French play, everyone knows Shakespeare, and even if we do an adaptation or a reimagining or a response, is that still assimilation? Or is that changing the form?
think it's assimilation because you're telling people it's like what you know.
Uh-huh.
And feeling that they can only like something that they know.
Yeah.
And that's how Hollywood is run. Until someone like, you know, Jordan Peele comes in and says, nah. So
He says nope.
he says nope, right? He says nope, right? It's just like, he says, you think you know what you're gonna see, but you don't. Nope, you know? And so it takes a level of like confidence and bravery. I mean, Basquiat, what he did, people act like people were doing what he was doing, but no one was doing what he was doing. No one was doing what he was doing.
I mean,
so
at the end of the day, we
but
are
of course
influenced
he
by
got
all
the
this.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna say, at the end of the day, we are influenced by all these things. I think that was
Of
in
course we are
Jasmeene.
influenced.
Yeah.
But to declare this was inspired by, it's not trusting that your story is going to stand on its own, right? It's saying, please like me because I'm inspired by you. I'm going to tell it my way, but I'm inspired by you. Yeah, I'm inspired by a lot of artists, but the moment you say this play is inspired by a classical play, yes, you're going to get tons of money. And can I say that there's something wrong with you for doing that? No, you do what you got to do. But is that decolonizing theater? The answer in my perspective is no, right? And that viewpoint is what I personally feel is keeping the Caribbean voice stifled. Because like if you go to Martinique or Guadeloupe and their French colonies, the artists will tell you that their voice is being stifled by their own people telling them that their voice is not French enough. So it's like, we got to stop stifling each other. And does it have to be African enough? Not necessarily. It has to be whatever you are enough. And if you're not going to let your you are stand out, then you're not allowing yourself to decolonize yourself. And finding out what you are, it's a difficult journey because we're always going to want to be like. But then in the end, as artists, if we can't dig deep enough to say, what am I don't see how we can hope that the rest of society will. I don't know. But let's just, I think this was great. Unless anyone has another thought to share, I'd love for us to.
It's a small thought, but
Yeah.
just in terms of, I think about a lot with writing of like, we've talked about the form of decolonizing the form and the practice and audiences, but I think about myself as a writer too, that there's just sometimes a lot, just like sometimes a lot of personal work on decolonizing my own imagination, just recognizing being American, like there's just, and I think it comes with, right, it's not, the trap can be perfectionism or fear or not wanting to put it, whatever that is, being like okay with those things, but like having the self-awareness to check for that, especially when writing characters that are not, I find writing characters that are so close to home, it's a lot more freeing and easier, but especially when writing characters that require understanding in a different context, that like if your research is in the American context, chances are you're going to be writing some stereotypes, just that like how important like the awareness of the, because I don't believe writers can't write outside of themselves. I do think it takes a deep level of accountability, research, and awareness. And like that piece of the decolonization is important, because I know writers who've written, for example, Latina characters. Oh, I did a lot of, but where did you do your research? You watched a lot of American written Latina stories that, again, as we've known through this conversation, are written for certain audiences, defining certain tropes. Maybe those tropes have some truth to them, but it's the only story. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, this is how every Latina character is in a kitchen praying to God, you know, like, so that's just the idea of decolonizing our own imaginations and our own work process.
Thank you. Jasmeene, I'm gonna sign off on this conversation. Do you want to put a button on it?
Yeah, I think, and it's a conversation that is like an ongoing conversation, right? So I'm just happy to, yeah, keep it going. I know we've got stuff to do. So yeah. Thanks,
Awesome.
y'all.